From spacious skies to the silver screen, America is one big movie set. In the Pacific, the land where dinosaurs come back to life. In the Atlantic, the beach 007 loves. In between are dusty towns that emerge out of nowhere. And research fields tailor-made for science fiction. Hollywood finds some of its most incredible landscapes in real life. These are the unexpected stars of Tinseltown. Places that have gained fame around the world, thanks to the movies. It's one of the world's most recognizable cities, home base to Batman, Spider-Man, and the Fantastic Four. Wiped out in Planet of the Apes, frozen in The Day After Tomorrow, and abandoned in I Am Legend. There's something about New York City that Hollywood can't resist. It's only fitting that people got their first glimpses of motion pictures here in 1894 with a contraption called the kinetoscope. In the decades that followed, New York served as the setting for films ranging from Midnight Cowboy to Taxi Driver to Wall Street. And many New York landmarks are synonymous with movies themselves. The Empire State Building became the romantic rendezvous point after the 1957 film An Affair to Remember, which later inspired Nora Ephron to write Sleepless in Seattle. The building didn't fare as well in the sci-fi disaster movie Independence Day, when aliens annihilated it, along with the rest of New York. Long before those movies, it starred in the groundbreaking 1933 film King Kong. Director Marion Cooper wanted the ape to scale the world's tallest building, but at the time, that kept changing. For a while, Cooper had the gorilla climbing the Chrysler Building. It held the tallest skyscraper title for less than a year, but its architecture has made it a filmmaker's favorite for decades. Spider-Man, played by Tobey Maguire, mourns his uncle's death on its rooftop. And the Fantastic Four's Human Torch speeds around it in the 2007 movie Rise of the Silver Surfer. It's also one of the few Midtown buildings to survive in the Marvel superhero smash-up, The Avengers. But one New York landmark seems to get demolished more than the rest. Lady Liberty. She's beheaded in Cloverfield, frozen in The Day After Tomorrow, flooded in artificial intelligence, and manhandled repeatedly in superhero movies. But her standout role may be bringing Charlton Heston to his knees when he realizes the Planet of the Apes is actually post-apocalyptic Earth. The Statue of Liberty's appearances aren't all doom and gloom. Daryl Hannah creates a sensation walking onto Liberty Island nude in the 1984 movie Splash. And in Men in Black 2, the statue's torch comes in handy when Agent K, played by Tommy Lee Jones, uses it to erase New Yorkers' memories of aliens who invaded the city. Just northeast of the statue is another Hollywood hotspot, the Manhattan Bridge. It takes a beating in the final installment of the Batman trilogy when the villain Bane destroys real and fictional bridges up and down the river. The bridge is part of the fictional Gotham City, a 19th century nickname for New York. Batman co-creator Bill Finger said he chose the name so people anywhere could identify with the stories. One of the most iconic images of the bridge appears in Sergio Leone's 1984 mobster classic, Once Upon a Time in America, with Robert De Niro. The shot of it towering over Brooklyn warehouses became the image used in the movie's poster art. Not to be outdone, the neighboring Brooklyn Bridge stole the show and a sizable chunk of the budget in the 2007 sci-fi thriller I Am Legend. Will Smith races here to evacuate his family from a rapidly spreading virus, only to see their chopper crash when the military blows up the bridge. Much of the scene was filmed on location over 6 nights and at a cost of $5 million. At the time, the largest amount spent on a single scene. The filmmakers had to meet requirements from 14 government agencies and hire 1,000 extras, including 160 National Guard members. The bridge gets far gentler treatment by Brooklyn native Woody Allen, who features it in his Oscar-winning love story, Annie Hall, among other films. But more often than not, Allen's lovelorn characters find their way to one of his favorite filming spots, Central Park. Allen shot scenes for one of his first movies, Take the Money and Run, here, and came back over the decades for Manhattan, Hannah and Her Sisters, and many more. The prolific filmmaker has occasionally shot places aside from New York, citing the high filming costs of the Big Apple. But inevitably, he returns. As Allen writes in Manhattan, New York was his town, and it always would be. West of the park is an apartment building that's seen its share of celebrity and tragedy. The Dakota was the real-life home of Lauren Bacall, Gilda Radner, and Judy Garland. John Lennon lived here from 1973 until 1980, when he was killed just outside. His widow, Yoko Ono, still owns apartments here and marks Lennon's death every year by putting a candle in her window. But the Gothic gabled building may be most recognized for its role as the Bramford, the building Rosemary and Guy move into in the chilling film Rosemary's Baby. Down the New Jersey Turnpike is another more unexpected Hollywood haunt, Philadelphia. This is director M. Night Shyamalan's longtime hometown and preferred movie set. He filmed The Sixth Sense, Signs, and The Village here, though it's tough to tell. Shyamalan leaves out major landmarks to keep the location vague. Perhaps so moviegoers will think his creepy characters could live in any city, including theirs. Other directors are drawn to downtown Philly for this oddly shaped prison. Built in 1829, Eastern State Penitentiary was once the world's most famous and expensive prison. Its unique star shape was part of prison reform, the idea being that long, narrow cell blocks would give guards better views of inmates. Al Capone and bank robber Willie Sutton spent time here, as did Bruce Willis in the 1995 sci-fi film 12 Monkeys. The prison, which is now a museum, became an insane asylum in the movie. It also serves as a hideout for actors Shia LaBeouf and Megan Fox, the stars of Transformers 2, who come here to escape the evil Decepticons. A few blocks away from Eastern State is a landmark known for a very human hero. A down-on-his-luck boxer comes here to the steps of the Philadelphia Museum of Art to train for the fight of his life. His name was Rocky Balboa. The movie, like its main character, was an underdog. With a budget of $1 million, the director filmed it in just 28 days. It went on to gross millions and win 3 Oscars. 3 decades later, fans still visit the museum just to climb the same stairs Stallone did in 1976. Hollywood has also come to Pennsylvania to film on what was once a piece of farmland and now is a part of history. This is where Civil War buff and media mogul Ted Turner shot his 1993 epic, Gettysburg, the first motion picture ever allowed to film on the battlefield. thousands of reenactors traveled here to be part of the film, which recounted General Robert E. Lee's second attempt at invading the North. Lee made his move in June 1863, splitting his men and sending them north into Pennsylvania. But Union forces, acting as a buffer between Lee's army and the capital, were right behind them. On July 1st, the battle at Gettysburg began. Actors, including Turner himself as an extra in the film, recreated the pivotal battle scenes, including ones at the boulder-covered Devil's Den and Little Round Top. At just over 4 hours, the movie was so long, theaters could only show it a few times a day. It didn't do well at the box office, but became one of the best-selling videos and DVDs of all time. Hollywood tends to frequent a popular spot in South Florida known as Magic City. Miami serves as the home of Ace Ventura: Pet Detective, the movie that launched Jim Carrey into stardom. Part of the 2006 James Bond film Casino Royale centers around Miami, but was shot elsewhere. 007 does frequent Miami's neighboring city, Miami Beach. The 1964 movie Goldfinger features the gorgeous coastline and, of course, the buxom Bond women. The next year, Bond saves the city from an atomic bomb in Thunderball. Just off Miami Beach is the aptly named Star Island, a man-made island that's been home to many celebrities over the years. Gloria Estefan owns this Spanish-style mansion, where her entry room boasts his and hers bathrooms. The ladies even has extra stalls. A few doors down from her, the almost home of Tony Montana, aka Scarface. In the cult classic, Montana, played by Al Pacino, is a Cuban immigrant turned violent coke smuggler. But as filming got underway, Cuban Americans protested, claiming Pacino's character stereotyped Cubans in America. The producers had to pull the plug and shoot the rest of the film in and around Los Angeles. A few hours south of Star Island is a Florida bridge that's seen its share of stunts. The now defunct Overseas Highway appears in Fast and Furious 2 and James Bond: License to Kill. But it's probably most recognizable for its role in True Lies, when Arnold Schwarzenegger, hanging out of a helicopter, rescues Jamie Lee Curtis. He pulls her to safety just as her limo plunges into the abyss. On the West Coast, a home in the hills of San Simeon State Park inspired what many say is the best film of all time, Citizen Kane. Few people have been as influential in Hollywood as the man who owned this land, William Randolph Hearst. The son of a wealthy mine owner, Hearst grew up camping on the thousands of acres his family owned here. When he inherited the land, Hearst told architect Julia Morgan he'd like to build a little something. Hearst was the Rupert Murdoch of his day. He extended his influence to Hollywood, where he became a powerful movie mogul, entertaining stars and politicians alike. Guests such as Winston Churchill and Calvin Coolidge visited the 165-room home, which Hearst modeled after a Spanish cathedral. Hearst's own private quarters, which he shared with his longtime girlfriend, actress Marion Davies, sat between the two towers overlooking the Pacific. The white marble pool is so grand, it was used in the 1960 epic Spartacus as Laurence Olivier's villa. Hollywood director Orson Welles found Hearst and his castle an irresistible target. Welles' 1941 film Citizen Kane was set at a palace called Xanadu, where a newspaper magnate lives with his increasingly unhappy second wife. Hearst retaliated by nearly ruining Wells' career. 6 years after Hearst's death in 1951, his family donated the castle to the state of California, where thousands of tourists visit it each year. Up the California coast is a landmark with a long movie career, the Golden Gate Bridge. Magneto moves it in the Marvel Comics movie X-Men: The Last Stand, and in the 2009 movie Star Trek, Starfleet Academy sits in its shadow. But many would say the bridge's most memorable role is in the Alfred Hitchcock classic Vertigo, where it looms over James Stewart as he rescues Kim Novak from her plunge into the water. Hitchcock made San Francisco and its dizzying heights an essential part of the movie, choosing the dauntingly steep and crooked Lombard Street for Stewart's apartment building, where it still stands today. Nearby, in the San Francisco Bay, sits Alcatraz, the setting for the 1979 movie Escape from Alcatraz, starring Clint Eastwood. The film was based on the remarkable true story of Frank Morris, a bank robber who ended up here because of his penchant for escaping. The Rock didn't change him. For months, Morris and his cohorts plotted how to make it across the surrounding water, ultimately building a raft out of raincoats. On the night of June 11, 1962, he escaped with 2 others through tunnels they dug with spoons. They were never heard from again. During filming, Eastwood apparently performed the final stunt, going down the prison wall and plunging into the water himself. 2 different times, the director feared his star had been lost in the treacherous current. 17 years later, Alcatraz starred with Nicolas Cage and Sean Connery in The Rock, in which the island is taken over by a bitter Marine general who aims warheads at the city. To keep costs down, the studio wanted much of the filming done in LA, but director Michael Bay insisted on using the real thing. One drawback, the island had become a national park, so Bay had to film with tourists wandering around. From California to Colorado, where an Estes Park hotel attracts tourists not just for its digs, but also its history in horror. In September 1974, author Stephen King and his wife checked into the Stanley Hotel, where they were the only guests before it shut down for the winter. In this room, number 217, King dreamt of his 3-year-old son running through the halls, screaming. When King woke up, he came up with the idea for The Shining, which was adapted into the Stanley Kubrick classic. In the book, King turns the Stanley into a fictional hotel named The Overlook. But Kubrick chose not to film here, instead opting for the exteriors of the Timberline Lodge in Northern Oregon. The Stanley did make the final cut of a far different movie, the 1994 comedy Dumb and Dumber. In it, the hotel becomes the swanky place Jim Carrey and Jeff Daniels stay in Aspen. Another famous comedian was scouting in Colorado when he came across an odd structure in the Denver foothills. This is known as the Sculptured House And it was what Woody Allen needed for his 70s sci-fi parody, Sleeper, in which a health food store owner discovers he's been cryogenically frozen for 200 years. The movie was a big success. The house, not so much. Architect Charles Deaton, who also designed Arrowhead Stadium in Kansas City, built the home in the 60s but never finished the interior. It sat vacant for 3 decades until a software millionaire restored and sold it in 2002. But the new owner faced foreclosure. It sold at auction in 2010 for $1.5 million. In southwest Colorado, one town became legendary for its role in history and Hollywood: Telluride. Butch Cassidy robbed his first bank here before becoming a notorious outlaw. And in the 60s, this nearby canyon hosted the stars of the beloved Western Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. It was here that Paul Newman and Robert Redford robbed the Durango and Silverton Railway, which today carries tourists and history buffs. In Butch Cassidy's time, it hauled gold and silver ore out of Colorado's mineral belt. Redford and Newman stopped the train and tried to blow open its safe, but end up destroying the entire mail car instead. The money thereafter rains down on them, as it did on the stars afterwards. The movie won 4 Academy Awards, and Redford named his annual film festival and ski resort after his character. Another Western town inspired one of the longest-running series in television history, Gunsmoke. This is Dodge City, Kansas, a rough and tumble town of the Old West. These modern storefronts depict the 1800s town that serves as the setting for dozens of westerns. Despite the life-size recreations, Dodge rarely makes the cut. The westerns depicted here are all shot someplace else. But Hollywood can't change history. These were the streets where Wyatt Earp and Bat Masterson took on outlaws, some of whom ended up in the legendary Boot Hill Cemetery. The rest hightailed it straight out of Dodge. In the Nevada desert sits a town long known for its sins, Las Vegas. The setting for one of Hollywood's most critically acclaimed movies, Leaving Las Vegas. Nicolas Cage turned down Dumb and Dumber with Jim Carrey to take the lead role, in which he plays a suicidal alcoholic. He won an Oscar for the performance. Vegas has a history full of colorful characters. The 1991 movie Bugsy with Warren Beatty was based on the real Bugsy Siegel, who built the Flamingo Hotel and Casino on what was then a scrappy stretch of Highway 91. Siegel spent $6 million turning it into a pleasure palace. But shortly after it started making money, Bugsy was dead, shot in the head reading the newspaper. Some say the killers were his own associates who suspected him of skimming profits. The Flamingo proved fortunes could be made in this desert valley. And then, the mob money flowed. Casinos rose, and Highway 91 became the Vegas Strip. Since then, this stretch has seen more stars than Bugsy could imagine. From Tom Cruise and Dustin Hoffman in Rain Man, to Mike Myers in Austin Powers. The world-famous Bellagio and its waterworks star in what some consider the ultimate Vegas movie, Ocean's 11. Brad Pitt, George Clooney, and their motley crew target a fictional vault at the Bellagio that holds its profits along with those of the Mirage and the MGM Grand. The heist is set for the night of a heavyweight fight at the MGM, when an extra $150 million will be in the vault to cover bets. Clooney and company pull it off. and get 2 more Ocean's movies to boot. Some incredible scenery in southern Nevada keeps Hollywood coming back to the Valley of Fire. These were sand dunes 150 million years ago in the age of the dinosaurs. Erosion and the shifting earth created the formations, which now make up a 42,000-acre state park. Autobots drive by this valley in Transformers, and Captain Kirk dies here in Star Trek Generations. In Total Recall, with Arnold Schwarzenegger, the valley plays the part of Mars. In Louisiana, a love affair has blossomed between Brad Pitt and the city of New Orleans. Since Hurricane Katrina, Pitt and other stars have brought so much movie business to the Big Easy, it's now called Hollywood South. A generous tax credit has helped. 10 years ago, Louisiana hosted 1 or 2 productions a year. Now, it averages 45. In the 2008 movie, The Curious Case of Benjamin Button, starring Pitt, the main character lives here, in the city's opulent Garden District, where he starts aging backwards. This area was also home to author Anne Rice, who lived in this 47,000 square foot Italian-style mansion, originally built as a boarding school in 1865. Rice's best-selling book, The Vampire Chronicles, became the goth movie Interview with a Vampire, starring Tom Cruise and, once again, Brad Pitt. Parts of that movie were filmed just up the Mississippi at a Louisiana plantation called the Oak Alley Mansion. 300-year-old oaks lead to the grand house, built by a sugar baron in the 1830s. It also appears in the movie Primary Colors, where John Travolta plays a womanizing presidential candidate. Another former Louisiana plantation serves a far different movie genre. This is Angola, the largest maximum security prison in the U.S. Known as The Farm, Angola has been part of some of Hollywood's most powerful prison movies. Angola's vast fields of soybeans, corn, and cotton appear in Monsters Ball, starring Halle Berry, a role that led her to becoming the first African-American woman to win an Oscar for Best Actress. And it was this cell block, Angola's former death row, that inspired Stephen King to write The Green Mile, later adapted into a movie starring Tom Hanks. The prison built the cell block in the 30s to house escape risks and death row inmates who were executed next door. Decades later, on Angola's modern-day death row, Catholic nun Sister Helen Prejean counseled inmates facing execution, which inspired her to write Dead Man Walking. After reading the book, Susan Sarandon pushed for it to become a movie and won an Oscar for her starring role. In the nearby state of Alabama, a small coastal town gained notoriety thanks to a fictional Southerner named Forrest Gump. In the movie, Gump, played famously by Tom Hanks, moves to Bayou La Batre to start a shrimping business that becomes wildly successful. This is, after all, the seafood capital of Alabama. La Batre is also known for its shipbuilding. In 2005, Disney secretly built and launched a 130-foot pirate ship here for the sequel to Pirates of the Caribbean. thousands of miles off the continental U.S., are islands that draw directors for many reasons. On Oahu, modern-day naval vessels became World War II ones in the 2001 movie Pearl Harbor, starring Ben Affleck and Kate Beckinsale. Numerous ships, including the battleship USS Missouri and frigate Whipple, stood for the actual ones attacked and sunk that fateful December day. More than 2,400 Americans died when the Japanese bombed the U.S. Pacific Fleet. During the movie's production, the cast and crew paid tribute to the fallen servicemen in a special ceremony at the Arizona Memorial. Hollywood recently celebrated the undisturbed beauty of the nearby island of Kauai in the 2011 drama The Descendants, starring George Clooney. In it, Clooney is entrusted with protecting his family's pristine land, which actually is private property on the island's southeastern side. The movie is based on the book by Cowie Hart Hemmings, who spent childhood vacations on the island's north shore. Which also stood in as the South Pacific in the 1976 remake of King Kong. But filming wasn't paradise. The director kept running into honeymooners, and one of his boats almost capsized. Steven Spielberg shot the opening scenes of Raiders of the Lost Ark here, and came back more than a decade later to film Jurassic Park. This 280-foot waterfall, which sits on private property in central Kauai, appears as scientists arrive at the dinosaur theme park. Locals now simply call it Jurassic Falls. During filming, a hurricane hit Kauai, halting production. But according to one report, Spielberg seized the opportunity, shooting the actual storm to portray part of his fictional one. Surfing is an integral part of Hawaii's history, so it only made sense for Hollywood to head here for the surfer flick Blue Crush. Two of the world's best surfing spots are off Oahu, Waikiki and the North Shore, home of the famous Bonsai Pipeline. Oahu was also home to the 1980s TV character Magnum P.I. and the setting for the original long-running Hawaii Five-0. Decades later, Adam Sandler filmed his comedies Punch Drunk Love and 50 First Dates here. But long before Sandler made it big, he was inspired by another movie. Shot back on the mainland in Eugene, Oregon, home to the University of Oregon. Its claim to fame, Animal House. The filmmakers were having trouble finding a college that would cooperate with their raunchy script. Then they called William Beatty Boyd, U of O's president. Boyd had turned down the graduate at his last university and didn't want to make the same mistake twice. Parts of the movie were filmed here, with this fraternity standing in as the pretentious Omega House, where incoming freshmen Kent Dorfman and Larry Kroger are called a wimp and a blimp, then joined Delta House instead. On the Oregon coast, another group of friends came here to Haystack Rock to start their hunt for treasure. They called themselves the Goonies. The 1985 cult classic is about a group of kids from Astoria, Oregon, where much of the movie was filmed. Among the stars, a very young Josh Brolin, whose more recent films include True Grit and No Country for Old Men. 23 miles up the coast sits a 20th century shipwreck that made its way to the post-apocalyptic film The Road. In the Viggo Mortensen film, a father and son come across the wreckage of the Peter Iredale as they head south, trying to survive. The four-masted vessel ran aground one stormy day in 1906, en route to the treacherous entrance to the Columbia River, known as the Graveyard of the Pacific. Over the years, 2,000 ships have gone down here. In neighboring Washington state, directors often gravitate to Seattle, and one of its trademarks, the Space Needle. Elvis Presley came here to film the 1963 movie It Happened at the World's Fair. And Dr. Evil made the Needle his headquarters in the 1999 film Austin Powers' The Spy Who Shagged Me. But many remember it in the romantic comedy Sleepless in Seattle with Tom Hanks. His character lived nearby in this houseboat community. The history of these homes goes back to the 1800s, when they weren't much more than floating shacks built to house timber workers. Today, movie buffs seek out this unusual neighborhood. And note that the Sleepless in Seattle house was listed for $2.5 million in 2008. In the Washington wilderness, a tiny logging town shot to stardom thanks to some teenage vampires. This is Forks, Washington, population 3,500, and the setting for the wildly popular Twilight books and movies. In them, a teenage girl named Bella falls for her vampire classmate, who then tries to protect her from a coven of evil vampires. The film wasn't shot in Forks, nor had author Stephanie Meyer even been here when she wrote the first book. But a quick internet search told her it was the rainiest city in the US, and Meyer figured vampires would want some cloud cover. Now, fans flock here, boosting tourism by 400% in 2009. Most residents welcome the deluge and even have a Stephanie Meyer Day to celebrate all things Twilight. Vampires take center stage in the South, too. This is Longwood Plantation in Natchez, Mississippi, and the home of a dangerous vampire king in the acclaimed HBO series True Blood. The house was built in 1860 by a wealthy cotton planter named Holler Nutt. He planned a 32-room mansion, but the next year, the Civil War broke out and the workers fled. 3 years later, Nutt died of pneumonia. The interior was never completed, and the house earned the nickname Nutt's Folly. It's now an historic landmark. An historic landmark in Michigan brought together an unlikely pair, Superman and Dr. Quinn, Medicine Woman. The Grand Hotel opened on Mackinac Island in 1887. But Hollywood set up shop here to film the 1980 sci-fi romance Somewhere in Time, starring Christopher Reeve and Jane Seymour. In it, Reeve is a hotel guest so entranced by a photo of Seymour that he travels back in time to meet her. Despite Reeve's recent stardom as Superman and Seymour's as a Bond girl, the movie didn't do well at first. Years later, it became a cult classic. Today, the hotel hosts a Somewhere in Time weekend every year. But science fiction is perhaps more at home about 1,700 miles away in the New Mexico desert. Here, miles from civilization, sits a massive radar dish, 82 feet wide, weighing 230 tons. Scientists put it here in the 70s to listen for faint signals from outer space. But they weren't looking for ET, The scientists are radio astronomers who study celestial objects that emit radio waves. To reach deep into space, they knew one dish wouldn't be enough. So they built 27 of them. They act in concert and are tuned by moving them relative to each other on stretches of railroad tracks. They are called the Very Large Array, or VLA. It appears in the opening of the sci-fi movie 2010, the sequel to 2001: A Space Odyssey. It also plays an integral part in the Jodie Foster film Contact, in which Foster plays a scientist who works here and makes first contact with an alien species. The first weeks of filming took place here, with Foster sitting alone in the midst of this most unusual observatory, hearing the first signals of something extraordinary. But shooting that scene was tricky, since this is a working government facility. The filmmakers needed to rearrange the dishes and choreograph their rotation. They went through months of arduous planning and negotiations to get the shots they needed without interfering with the VLA's day-to-day operations. The array recently underwent a major upgrade that's made it far more sensitive, able, in theory, to detect something as weak as a cell phone call from Jupiter. Aliens and the Old West don't usually mix. But at Bonanza Creek Ranch outside Santa Fe, anything can happen. The land made its first movie appearance in 1955 and hasn't stopped since. It's now an all-inclusive film location with 5 ponds, 2 sets, and 1 movie town. Daniel Craig and Olivia Wilde came here to film the 2011 sci-fi western Cowboys and Aliens. In it, a spaceship arrives to take over Earth, starting with the Wild West. Luckily, the aliens don't stand a chance against Craig and Harrison Ford. A short gallop away is another Hollywood hangout, a ranch owned by director and famed fashion designer Tom Ford. Director Kenneth Branagh came here to film his 2011 movie, Thor, starring Natalie Portman and Chris Hemsworth. The filmmakers added on to an existing movie set to build the fictional town of Puente Antiguo, where Thor has his final showdown with a creature called the Destroyer, formerly known as the Cook Movie Ranch. This was also a filming location for the remake of 3:10 to Yuma. 2 decades earlier, Robert Duvall and Tommy Lee Jones came here to shoot the highly acclaimed miniseries Lonesome Dove, based on the Pulitzer Prize-winning book. But it's the undisturbed landscape of the Valles Caldera National Preserve that's attracted one of the Wild West's most enduring heroes, the Lone Ranger. The 2013 movie filmed here features Armie Hammer, of Social Network fame, as the lead, and Johnny Depp as Tonto. This 89,000-acre property actually sits inside a collapsed crater in the volcanic Jemez mountain range. It also served as the main homestead in the 2003 Ron Howard film, The Missing, starring Cate Blanchett and Tommy Lee Jones. For decades, it was a privately owned ranch until it became a national preserve in 2000. When Hollywood isn't here, the real star in Valle Caldera is nature itself. Another beautiful part of New Mexico has been in the movie business since the silent film era. This is the other Las Vegas, founded 70 years before Nevada's. The Coen brothers filmed their 4-time Oscar winner No Country for Old Men here, using Vegas as a stand-in for 2 border towns. And in 2010, Robert Downey Jr. and Zach Galifianakis shot the comedy Due Date here. Another famous duo roared through town decades earlier. Peter Fonda and Dennis Hopper in the 60s counterculture movie Easy Rider. It seems no matter where you are in America, there's a story to tell, whether real or imagined. From the first silent movies shown in New York to the bloody battles that defined the country. From the rock, synonymous with a cult classic, to the castle that inspired a masterpiece. Hollywood will keep coming back to these cities and towns, these coastlines and countrysides, to tell us stories we'll only see at the movies.